Back in the day, before streaming, before CDs, we listened to music on albums. A vinyl disc spinning 33 and a third revolutions per minute brought us great music one side at a time. 20 or so minutes of music, 4 or 5 songs usually, that created a single listening experience. This format exposed us to other songs of the artist, not just the hits, and often flowed in an order that was created to build and maintain or mold a musical experience for the listener.
Sideshow brings musical experiences from the past to life today. Here, we discuss and review individual sides of record albums we have grown to appreciate and hope you will too. Welcome to The Sideshow. All right, welcome to The Sideshow, everyone. This week, Mark and I have decided that we're going to look at live albums for sides, and Mark is going to be taking this episode. Mark, why don't you tell everybody what we're going to be talking about?
Oh, thanks, Mike. And yeah, excited about Live Album Week. We haven't focused on these yet. They tend to be compilations, which is just a different nature of the beast than actual albums. But there are a number of live albums that really have some great sides, some great memories. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to really focus on a few of those. And today, I am going to be talking about side 4 from the live album Live Rust by Neil Young and Crazy Horse. Which is just great. This, I mean, thinking back, Mike, when we were in high school, it was hard to go to a party that this album was not played, at some point along the way. Really popular album at the time. One of the things that people focus on why it was a great album is it introduced kind of a new generation to the music of Neil Young, who had music going all the way back into the 60s, and a lot of that music got introduced to a new generation through this album, through this live album. So we listened to it a lot. We enjoyed it, and I want to focus on side 4, the final side of the album. But before we dive into the side itself, let's step back a little bit and talk about Neil Young. This is a person who has been making music since the 60s, and he continues to make music to this day into his late 70s, and has been through a lot of different reincarnations. He's been through a lot of musical genres. He, has been from a very, political and protest music through music you can tell he's just having fun experimenting with and working with. So a really impressive career with a lot of stuff. So we won't really be able to march through everything that he'd done prior to this live album, which took place in 1978, but we can talk a little bit about it, a little bit about Neil. He was born in 1945, so he's coming up on 80 years old. He's from Canada. He moved around a bit in Canada, but I think that, he always talked about Winnipeg as being one of the consistent places that he was from and spent time in. But he did some played in like some high school bands, and then after that some, moving around with a number of different bands and some solo work, but did get himself into the point where he was touring and meeting people, which obviously, is an important part about a young artist's career. He met Joni Mitchell while he was touring there, and probably more significantly also met Stephen Stills in Canada before he moved to the Los Angeles area in 1966. Him and his bass player hopped into a used hearse that they had purchased and drove down to California, where they began to do work as musicians, and really almost immediately formed the band along with Stephen Stills of Buffalo Springfield. Now, Buffalo Springfield was a great band. They were Neil Young was admitted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1995, and Buffalo Springfield was admitted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as well in 1997. We could have a whole episode and discussion about good band. I don't know if they belonged in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They had a song that, for what it's worth, is the name of the song, but was an incredibly powerful song that was really identified with the protest movement in 1960. It's myself. I have a hard time, unless you were just really focused a lot on the band, about finding a lot of other material that they had that was Hall of Fame worthy. Again, that's a conversation for another day. I think that you look at what they were doing, and that process continued with both Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young and Neil Young further on, which were more significant contributions. But that really was the start. They did get some success from that. And from that,
just to
go on, Mike.
interrupt real quickly, the one of the reasons that I think that Buffalo Springfield gets a lot of attention is, in addition to Neil Young and Stephen Stills, I think the most substantial members of that band, but also there were members of the band that went on to form the band Poco, which had some popularity in the early mid '70s, and also Jim Messina, who became more popular in the Loggins and Messina with Kenny Loggins. And in addition to For What It's Worth, which was definitely their most well-known, most popular song, a lot of other good material. I mean, like Neil Young, Mr. Soul was a Buffalo Springfield song, and Broken Arrow was Buffalo Springfield. And so I don't necessarily disagree with you but that's the explanation that I would give as to why.
And taking a look, to be fair, taking a look at what the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has become, they're branching out into a lot of different areas. Again, could be a topic for a complete different discussion. They're clearly branching out into a lot of different areas. So,
when Cat Stevens was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and when he spoke, he said he didn't necessarily understand why, because he doesn't play rock and roll.
Exactly. Well, more recently with Dolly Parton not wanting to even to accept her nomination into there for that exact same reason. Yeah. Clearly, there's things, and Neil Young actually refused to attend the induction ceremony for Buffalo Springfield. It was hosted on VH1, and he felt the whole thing was becoming more about trying to make commercial dollars than to actually recognize rock and rollers. Yeah. That wasn't so much about who they were inducting, but the whole process and the monetization of the induction and that type of thing. But Neil was never one to be worried about pissing people off. Was another thing. And in fact, he did a lot of different things with a lot of different acts in a lot of different groups of people with a lot of different companies and labels. And one of the issues that he had was he butted heads a lot. He was not a really good sharer of power and direction. He wasn't a good co-pilot. He had visions. Clearly those visions were very powerful and very popular, just looking at his music, but he butted heads a lot. He butted heads with Stephen Stills a lot in Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and there's stories about their performance at Woodstock, about his refusal to be photographed or filmed during some of these times, and just kind of a difficult to get along with situation. There was several recording sessions and tours that he dropped out of in the middle because of or just deciding he didn't want to do it anymore. He clearly had a vision for what he wanted to do, or the statements that he wanted to make, whether they be political or in music, artistic, that he felt he needed to stay true to. And ultimately, as we take a look at his career, as he started to become incredibly successful, which he did, based on the work that he'd done with these groups, which were very popular, and then his solo career, he began to see that even fear some of the fame that he'd had. So looking back on it, his early success and with groups like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and in parallel he was working and releasing solo albums at the same time. And
before you
yeah.
move on, Mark, I just for people that are interested in Neil Young, just generally, there's an excellent biography, and I don't recall the name of the author off the top of my head. I believe it was done with Neil Young's cooperation, but it's called Shaky.
Okay.
Is that which is kind of a pseudonym or nickname for Neil Young. But for people who are interested in taking a deep dive into Neil Young's story, that's a good place to start.
Mm-hmm. Well, and quite and thanks for that recommendation. There's a lot of stuff that's out there about him. He's been involved with the production of some films of him touring, including the tour that we're going to be talking about on Live Ruster. A lot of material out there and a lot to dig into, especially in some of these different phases of music. And if you take a look at the music in the 60s, especially if we're going to be talking about work with a group like Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young, you're talking about this protest movement and this protest culture in the time, which the music that they were performing obviously fit very well into. In fact, if you're going to go back and watch a documentary on TV about this time period, I doubt you're going to find one that does not portray some of this music somewhere in it. Songs like Ohio that were written in response to the Kent State, violence and ultimately, killing of students there by the National Guard troops. I mean, these are not just music that was successful art, but I mean, they really stick out as part of history and in what they're doing. Now, at the same time that Neil Young was working with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, when that song came out, Ohio, in 1970, he was, working on and releasing a solo album after the Gold Rush, which was an incredibly popular album for him, incredibly successful, and had a number of songs that are his, that he continues to perform to this day. In fact, there was some on the album that we will be talking about. And some that started some interesting stories and feuds with him. I mean, one of the songs on their Southern Man was, a very, grievances he had with the attitudes in the South. This became something that was responded to by Leonard Skinner in their song Sweet Home Alabama, where they specifically called out Neil Young and not really being concerned about what he had to say. Now, years later, both of them will point out, Neil Young said he liked Leonard Skinner. He enjoyed the music, and I believe Ronnie Van Zant actually wore a Neil Young T-shirt on the cover of one of their albums. So some of this was more for statement as opposed to their actual personal feelings about each other.
And I believe that there was mutual admiration between both. I think they liked Neil Young, and when he heard the song, he liked it. I mean, I've never heard Neil Young say anything other than positive things about the song Sweet Home Alabama, as well as the band. And in fact, some of the material that was written around the late 70s, he had in mind to give to Leonard Skinner, but because of the plane crash, he couldn't do it. And another part of that story is on his Harvest, I believe it's Harvest album. There's a song called Alabama, which takes a similarly dim view of some of the attitudes of some of the Southern people. And I believe that's the reason a lot of people imagine that Leonard Skinner is from Alabama. Well, they're from Jacksonville, Florida.
Yeah.
The reason they said Sweet Home Alabama was in direct response, I believe, to Neil Young's song on, I believe it's Harvest, called Alabama.
Well, and Harvest, also another incredibly successful commercial album. In fact, the largest one that he'd had to that point. It contained his really only number one single, which was Heart of Gold. But this album really put him on the commercial and the financial foundation of a successful artist. And based on his own accounts, he really didn't like it there in that spot, in that kind of spotlight, and the, whether it be the pressure or just the way he felt. He described it later. I won't get the wording exactly right, but he found himself walking down this road that he did not like, and he chose instead to go into the ditch. And it might have been a more difficult walk for him, but he met more interesting people. And from that point, he really started to move into different directions. In fact, in a lot of circles, they refer to his next couple albums as the Ditch Trilogy, where he began to, based on that whole notion, really work in some different areas and directions, to the point where it began to frustrate his record company. Some of the albums that he recorded after the fact weren't released until later, and the timing gets a little confused between when he was writing and performing these albums and when they were actually being produced or released to the public. And it was also a time of some personal tragedy for him. He lost not only a member of Crazy Horse, his band, but one of his longtime roadies to drug overdoses. We'll actually come back to that in some of the songs that we'll be talking about on the side. And also during this time, he had some tours where he reunited with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and continuing on releasing solo albums during this time, and some significant events as well. He appeared on The Last Waltz, the big performance and ultimately movie about the last performance of the band, and then began to again reconsolidate and look at where he was at, and doing a lot of touring. And ultimately, in the late 70s, 1978, you have this Rust Never Sleeps tour, which finally, really settled into a format of half acoustic, focusing on a lot of his earlier work, and half electric. We're really with a strong showing from the band Crazy Horse. And that's how this concert tour went. And it was, again, his full catalog of music between these two formats. And that's ultimately what came out into the album Live Rust that we're going to be talking about. Now, it wasn't the only product of this tour. There was a movie, Rust Never Sleeps, that came from this tour that had a lot of video, mainly from his performances at the Cow Palace in San Francisco, and another album that was called Rust Never Sleeps. That was a lot of music that was brought from this tour, but it was taken into the studio, and there was a lot of work and overdubbing and that type of thing that was done. So a few of the songs from the tour were previewed there, but the album Live Rust was actually more of what you would have seen in the concerts itself. Recorded live concert work, 4 sides. It was a double album. And today we're going to be focusing on side 4.
Well, and the comment you made earlier about, its sort of ubiquitousness at a certain point when we were in high school. The first Neil Young record I ever purchased and owned was Live Rust. And it has a certain greatest hits kind of quality at some points, but some newer material as well. I will always have incredibly fond memories of the whole album.
Exactly. Well, let's take a look at the album real quickly here. Again, it's a double album. This is the cover, and this is, I was talking about, we're in high school, we get this album, you look at a picture like this of Neil Young performing in front of this crowd, and it really gave you a feel of rock star in looking at this and in listening to the album. The back side of the album, which has a track listing, but also again this close up of Neil with his guitar and the picture of Jimi Hendrix there. Gatefold double album. Again, very cool kind of picture on the inside. Just really screamed rock star. Rock and roll band.
And the girl that's on the guy's shoulders.
Yes.
Yes. Girls used to wear those when we were in high school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that feeling at a concert again. You got some girls on the shoulders. Everybody's hands up. Just this album. Looking at it and staring at it was like just this is a rock concert here. Some very good also on the sleeves inside. Some very good pictures of the concert himself here. With Neil did a lot of harmonica work, and you can see him here with the harmonica around his neck, and this was clearly from the acoustic set. From the band Crazy Horse with their Star Wars Jedi outfits that they wore here. Neil liked Star Wars. In fact, there's a couple other pieces of work that he's done, whether they be in music or film, that really reference that. And then some more artwork on the sleeves. Again, a double album of Neil and them performing. So really, a lot of art. One of the great things about albums is your ability to kind of open them up and look at them and absorb, the photography and other things that they were saying while you're listening to the music. And this was certainly one of them. So we're going to be focusing on side 4. Okay, so the sides 1, 2, 3, 4 went in order with the typical performance or set list that they had. There were some songs that did not, in their their concert touring, that did not make this album, and you can hear those on that other album that I had said. We'll focus on side 4, but I do want to talk a little bit about the opening on the acoustic side, because there is a song that is really just a live performance song for Neil. And it starts out on the acoustic side. Side 1 ends with a song called My, My, Hey, Hey, which is called Out of the Blue. And this is a song, we're going to hear it again, basically, on side 4. But it opens up on an acoustic side, and in it as My, My, Hey, Hey, Out of the Blue. We're going to hear it again on side 4 as Hey, Hey, My, Into the Black. And I really think this is an important part of this album, because I like to think back to the actual live performance itself. This is not a song that was a previous hit of Neil Young's. This was a song that a lot of people would have been hearing for the first time in this concert. And it's got a lot to do with the way that it's put together. Even though you would hear it for the first time, the way that it's performed is you can be singing along to it at the end, because it's a very straightforward and simple set of lyrics. So you hear it once early in the concert, and then we're going to go back and hear it again on side 4, and we'll talk about that when it comes up. But I do want to bring in that there is this bookend nature of My, My, Hey, Hey, and Hey, Hey, My. If you go to the album, which is a shorter album, it's just a single album, Rust Never Sleeps, from that same tour, these actually bookend the album. First and last song on the album. So they're clearly set up in Neil's mind as being a part of the beginning and the end of the show. But let's turn now to side 4. This song, which would have been towards the end of the concert, is 3 songs. And so, we're live in concert, so a little longer versions of songs, and we end up with 3 songs. The first being Like a Hurricane. And this song really sets up what you're hearing with Crazy Horse in these electric sets. It also sets up what many grunge bands in the 90s would say was what they really focused on and were really influenced by. This very heavy, distorted guitar, but not just, rambling noise. It moved into a rhythm that formed the basis of very high quality songs. So we're taking this distortion, this reverb, this loudness and noise, yet we're making real music with it that people can not only tap their feet, bang their heads, and sing along to, but you've got this very clear, and it starts right from the beginning of this album. You're hearing him chomp and hit on the guitar, and it stops for a second, and then it rolls into the guitar riff from Like a Hurricane, which is, was was from a previous album and was noticeable to the crowd. You can hear the crowd kick in as they recognize the song. And this is a song that you are rocking your head, leaning back and forth on. And for those that know the song, as the chorus hits, you are singing along with the song. And the song itself, it is really about this magnificent, hectic nightmare that occurs as you're meeting a woman and you're moving to that point of actually reaching out to them, talking to them, and envisioning getting to that first kiss. And all of the great and horrible and peaceful and crazy, fantastic, and awful stuff that goes in to that process. And you hear this through from the very beginning. Starts out with, once I thought I saw you in a crowded, hazy bar, dancing on the light from star to star. Kind of a dreamy, kind of, nighttime situation, but here's this girl on the other side of the bar. Obviously, it strikes as beautiful, an angel dancing through the stars, and then there's kind of what I'm going to speak for men. I'm not going to speak for women. This whole notion of the process of getting up to go over and talk to them. You're dreaming of things. You're dreading things. This whole process, and as Neil has said, that the process is much like a hurricane, and describes this woman in the chorus as, you are like a hurricane, there's calm in your eye, and I'm getting blown away. And that is many a man has made those steps towards that woman on the other side of the bar from star to star, and they've ended up getting blown away, never made it to the other side. But they do want to reach that calm within the storm.
Well, and it's sort of like Neil saying, like, oh yeah, well, when your dad tells you as you go off to the dance, don't worry, the worst thing they can do is say no.
Yeah,
it's like, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
It's not quite that simple.
Exactly.
Not quite that simple.
And yeah, maybe they do just say no, but it is this devastating just that occurs, and the fear of that drives, I don't know, 85-90% of the daily behavior of every teenage boy that is out there, and young man that's moving through these crowded, hazy bars that Neil is talking about.
Well,
and
I fared no better than Neil in my own experience,
exactly.
Under the same circumstances.
Exactly, certain with it. And what makes this a great song from a live song perspective is the chorus to the song, which does, it's, you are like a hurricane, there's calm in your eye, and it moves, and it repeats that a number of times, which allows the crowd to sing along. It is the type of song that if you saw them in concert, you would sing along to it. You can hear the crowd responding to it in the concert. You can feel as they come into those choruses that occurs. So clearly, just a great live performance that is going on, while you're listening to this song.
And that, that's a good way of describing Like a Hurricane, I mean, as a song, mm-hmm. and as a sing-along type song. And Crazy Horse was a great band for Neil Young. And they weren't Yes or mm-hmm. Rush. They were they just played very straightforward, not to say simple, but just very straightforward rock and roll. And because of the way they played off each other and Neil Young played off of them, as simple, relatively simple as it was, it had that quality that made you tap your foot and mm-hmm. think about it and start singing along.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can without going into unnecessary detail, I can remember a beer party that you and I were at where a number of the attendees started singing along with Like a Hurricane and chose to improvise some of the words, which I shan't bore the audience with, but I will never forget that as long as I live.
Well, and it was a song that you wanted to sing along with, regardless of what words you used to replace. And the song continues. You as you look at these lyrics, you start to question: are we talking about something that has actually happened to Neil? Is he talking to, say, his girlfriend about this time and how their relationship is going on, or is he just talking about what's going on in someone's head while they're contemplating this whole thing? There are words in one of the verses: "I am just a dreamer and you are just a dream." So this could all be just going on inside of his head. You could have been anyone to me. So this kind of, it really implies it's not someone that he's looking back at. This is like while he's either in the bar or even thinking about it, maybe the next day. And he also talks about, before that moment you touched my lips, that perfect feeling when time just slips away. And really almost saying, boy, once you finally get to that first kiss, it's over. After that, we're just going through the highs and lows of a relationship, if we're lucky enough to,
our foggy trip.
Our foggy trip. So, it really, the bulk of this really just focuses on that hurricane that is going on from the time you first see someone until you're actually able to make a connection. And, the journey that's, specifically men have gone on trying to make that first kiss happen. And just done in a fun and loud way.
And the sort of the loud, screechy Neil Young guitar that accompanies this is perfect to kind of sum up that sort of raucous, there's the wind is blowing and there's shit flying around, and I'm trying to keep my feet flat on the ground as I navigate my way through this scenario. And it's got great lead guitar. In the instrumental breaks in this song. And it's just, it's one of the quintessential Neil Young songs, because he recorded with Crazy Horse, periodically over the course of his career, and he always managed to come up with good stuff when he was playing with Crazy Horse, in my opinion.
Yeah, really good guitar. And there's Neil has good vocals. He's a good songwriter. The words are good, and he's got good vocals, but he's got a way of singing that makes people think that they can sing too. If you listen to his music, especially on the live album, it sounds like, God, did he just miss that note? He sounds like he's more someone having fun singing than some type of professional trained singer. He's just out there like, it doesn't really matter if you can sing good. If it's inside you, sing. And he just has a way of performing, and I don't mean that to say he can't sing, because he can, and he's got a voice that works well in very soft acoustic songs and in songs like this as well.
Well, some very influential rock musicians have not been good singers, and in a similar way that you're describing Neil Young to be like. Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix, Lou Reed. Those guys can't sing in the conventional sense, but as far as playing rock songs, rock and roll songs, they manage to convey something that is unique.
And
certainly Neil
say.
does.
Exactly.
Neil does.
I would agree. Well, we move from Like a Hurricane, and the next song is Hey Hey My My, Into the Black. Now, as I talked before, this was actually previewed. Basically the same song. We'd call it an unplugged version, but it's an acoustic set of this. The title, instead of Hey Hey My My, is My Hey Hey, and it's subtitled Out of the Blue on the acoustic portion at the beginning of the album. And now its title is Hey Hey My, and it's Into the Black. And this song is not acoustic. From from what was already a heavy distortion laden track on Like a Hurricane, that goes even deeper as we get into Hey Hey My, and again it's this doom 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 doom, very low, deep, and even then it comes back with this bwomp 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 that makes you feel like your speakers are damaged. It's what you hear in like an old car whose speakers have been played way too loud, way too often, and the actual cone paper is starting to rip. That you get that sense, am I damaging my speakers with the way this comes out? You can just picture that the people in the front were literally feeling it on their face from the stacks of Marshall amps coming at them while they were playing. I mean, very just deep, distorted, and it moves into this again very heavy sounding riff, but we move into these words, hey hey my, rock and roll can never die. Very, you hear those words, you get it. Those are easy words to hear and understand, and he's going to be saying them a number of times, which makes it easy for the crowd to join in and sing along. And along with being previewed this song earlier in the concert, and now hearing it, especially with the amped up sound that's going on, it is a great performance. And I can imagine, I never saw this live during this tour. I would have loved to, because I would bet you that everybody that was packed into the Cow Palace while this was playing was enjoying themselves listening to this song.
I only saw Neil Young perform once during the time that I was going out to see live concerts on a fairly regular basis. It was around, I believe it was 1986, and or that neck of the woods. He toured with Crazy Horse, and the album that was current was, I think, Landing on Water, which I never acquired. But he played a lot of the stuff that was the electric stuff on Live Russ. I don't recall whether he played Hey Hey My or not, but he definitely played that Crazy Horse loud distorted electric guitar material, and it's great. It's I mean it was a fantastic concert. Fantastic. So I mean so I've seen him and Crazy Horse perform live, and I believe it was all the original members of Crazy Horse, or for the same members that were on the Rust Never Sleeps tour. So if that's any indication, and I imagine it was only better, 7 or 8 years earlier for this tour.
Awfully good. Awfully good. The song itself, although the lyrics are pretty simple, the song was written really derived out of a time when he was working on kind of in a punk phase. He was actually working with the members of the band Devo, specifically Mark Mothersbaugh from that band. So people don't normally think of the song, Whip It, when they're thinking of Neil Young. But again, he worked with a lot of different people. He had, he went off into rockabilly. He went off into punk. He's done obviously very hard rock and grunge. He's done folk and protest. I mean, there is not a lot of anything in the orbit of rock that he hasn't spent a little bit of time in during his career. But this let's call it this punk rock interest that he had, he had some focus on punk bands and punk music, and he actually specifically mentions Johnny Rotten in this song. He says the king is gone, but he's not forgotten. This is the story of Johnny Rotten. So kind of telling you what the song is about fairly clearly right there.
Well, and a word that's been used to by people to try and talk about where Neil was coming from was to get away from complacency.
Yes.
And that, in the mid 70s, kind of rock stars had become, rich and famous and a little bit more dilettantish than he thought was healthy for creating good music. And that's not necessarily totally true.
Mm-hmm.
But in his case, he just, he looked at Johnny Rotten and thought, this guy's pissing people off, and kind of his music is doing things. People are reacting to what he's doing, and and you mentioned grunge at one point. I mean, I think that many people regard the sound of the electric material from this tour and these albums that we're talking about, or this album, as being kind of a prototype for what became grunge. Stuff, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, and stuff like that.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
They took their cues from this stuff.
Well, and I mean, you could just listen to them. I mean, they in their words, they point back to this as really significant influence on the music they like and wanted to play.
Kurt Cobain's Suicide Note had lyrics from this song.
Yes.
On it. So Neil made an impression.
And the words that they're talking to, and again, there's two parts to this song, the acoustic set, and it's better to burn out than to fade away, which was on the acoustic set. The part of it on this particular song, it's better to burn out because rust never sleeps, is what they said. Either way, you're talking about a notion which, first of all, was a very powerful, anthem/slogan of the punk movement. It's like, look, we're going to burn out now while we can enjoy ourselves, as opposed to play the long game, which, it just, a lot of people in their 20s, I think they made it more of an anthem of the punk rock era. But I mean, that's been kind of rock and roll from the beginning. And, one of the things that Neil talked about when you talk about Johnny Rotten and people saying, this is a bad guy, he's causing trouble, this is a bad influence, Neil Young kind of pointed out that that's what they've been saying all the way back to Elvis. Yeah. Elvis, the Beatles, all these people were troublemakers that, were gonna cause us more harm than good. And I think that he saw a lot of the same thing in bands like the Sex Pistols and Johnny Rotten. And so, pointing that out, a little bit about them. And there's another, this whole notion of out of the blue into the black is clearly part of this. The subtitle of the acoustic set being out of the blue, into the black here. And that's one of the lines of the song as well, out of the blue and into the black. And this can, we've talked before about the notion of night in rock and roll. Out of the blue, out of the day, and into the night can, be a clear assumption. It's also, though, if you look at Neil, he was on the road and he went into the ditch, out of the blue and into the black. He has to deal with, and we'll talk on the next song about the death of some people that he has, that he has known, out of the blue and into the black. Because another thing that he says here is, once you're gone, you can't come back. So there's clearly a notion of, there's a little bit of permanence in what he's talking about. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's talking about death, whether it be overdose or suicide. Once you're gone out of your youth, you can't go back. So, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. And quite frankly, Neil hasn't been very helpful in his current or later writings explaining exactly what he was talking about, because there's been a little bit of conflict in what he said. And actually, in the end, when you listen to him, there was a number of people that he was working with, who had different cool lines or lines that seemed to fit. So he plucked those and put them together in a song, quite frankly, that I think he wanted the crowd to be able to sing along to as he was performing.
This song got played on the radio, Hey Hey My My,
mm-hmm.
and just its in your facedness, just the music like you described at the beginning, it was hard not to take note of it. And I had heard of Neil Young, and I'd heard of CSNY, and obviously a lot of their material got played on the radio. But on WAPL in Appleton, I can recall before getting Live Rust, hearing the song, and it made an impression, and enough for me to I believe motivate me to go get the album and start to check out this guy Neil Young.
Mm-hmm. And from this song, which is a very just clapping your hands, stomping your feet, singing along type song, we transition then into the final song of the side, the final song of the album, which is Tonight's the Night. And although it continues to have this deep, distorted kind of feel as it started, you can tell it's slowing down a little bit. It's lowering just the whole mood a little bit from the previous song. And it moves into it's Tonight's the Night is the lyric. And it repeats that a number of times. Again, more lyrical than guitar that we're hearing now. And it has a feeling of slowing things down. And this song itself, the lyrics talk about one person. They talk about Bruce Berry. So Bruce Berry was a working man. He used to load the Econoline van. And a sparkle was in his eyes, but his life was in his hands. Now, Bruce Berry was a roadie for that Neil Young had worked with, and some of these other bands that were, associated, because he had a lot of different associations. A lot of people knew Bruce Berry. His brother was Jan Berry of the group Jan and Dean. So he was a part of the music industry. He was known and
for the scene,
part of the scene, and he was liked. And he was, someone that a lot of these bands, when you're talking about the roadies and that are working with them, that they really depend on to be able to go from night to night. So he was known and liked, and Bruce Berry ended up overdosing, and he talks about how this guy, when people were gone, he'd pick up his guitar, he'd sing a song in a shaky voice that was as real as the day was long. And tonight's the night. What he means by tonight's the night is tonight's the night that Bruce Berry is going to die. And this is something that he was heading towards. He was addicted to heroin. His life was in his hands. Life was in his hands. His life was in the needle that he was holding. The notion of people suffering from addiction and dying from addiction, was a big impact on Neil. There's another song on this album from the acoustic set, which is "The Needle and the Damage Done," is the name of the song. And that was actually written about the struggles of one of the members of Crazy Horse, Danny Whitten. Interestingly enough, it was Danny Whitten that originally introduced Bruce Berry to heroin, and both of them ended up dying of overdoses. Bruce Berry won in 1973. Danny Whitten had died a year earlier in 1972. Neil Young had actually brought Danny in to help with preparing for a tour, and it was very clear that Danny just wasn't going to be able to cut it. He was too deep into to his own demons, and Neil cut him loose. He gave him a plane ticket and some money to head back to L.A., and Danny never made it to the flight. He OD'd that night. Neil carried that with him for a long time until he came with the grips that these things were in. This was in Danny's hands, not his, and the fate of Bruce Berry, which was coming, was in his hands as well. As it turned out, tonight was the night, and after a long struggle, he finally succumbed to the disease and he overdosed. The song itself talks a little bit about the kind of day that he would have. They'd work late, they'd party late, they'd get up late in the day, they'd move on to the next town. He used to sleep until the afternoon. If you ever heard him sing, I guess you won't too soon. It just a song about this guy and how he died, and although that Neil hadn't really addressed directly by name in a song anybody that had this, he finally decided he was going to hear and specifically brought this guy up, and goes back towards the end of the song to where he started, that Bruce Berry was a working man, and that tonight is the night. Yes, it is. Tonight's the night, and just rolls that out. Still with an electric, distorted, loud song, but obviously a slower, just a sadder way to end this album and to end this show.
Well, and Danny Whitten was with Crazy Horse, earlier in Neil Young's career. The album Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, which has a bunch of good songs. I mean, that has Cinnamon Girl, Cowgirl in the Sand, Down by the River. And so, I mean, Danny Whitten was a kind of an important part of Neil's musical evolution. And I believe there's a lot of mutual respect and affection between the two of them. And, when he died, it was very impactful on Neil Young. And the Needle and the Damage Done, I believe, originally appeared on the Harvest album. And kind of Neil was on his at his peak, and then when Bruce Berry, the roadie, this happened again. I mean, it really impacted Neil Young. It bummed him out. It really fucked him up. Not in that horrible of a way, but it got under his skin. And the album Tonight's the Night was just kind of a bleary album, and a good one. I mean, an excellent album, one of Neil Young's better solo albums. But the relationship with Bruce Berry, I mean, you're absolutely right. It certainly talks about that in this biography I mentioned of Neil Young, and Neil was aware that Bruce Berry was using heroin, and kind of based on what experience he'd already had with Danny Whitten, was deathly aware of where it was potentially going to go. And there's a story in this biography that describes Bruce showing up and telling Neil that one of the guitars that was part of the touring equipment had been stolen. And Neil is just like, he's shaking his head, and he knows that that's bullshit. And he either says to Bruce Berry, or he thinks it. It's like, Bruce, you put that guitar in your arm. And after the album Tonight's the Night had been recorded, and they went out on tour, and people that wanted to hear Harvest type material were here. I mean, and the live versions of Tonight's the Night that were played at that time were even stranger and starker than some of the parts of the version on Live Rust, which has got a lot more teeth and just a lot starker, scarier song than the other two. And Neil would say things like, "You put the guitar in your arm." He'd sing that during the performances. I mean, it was almost like it was a way of Neil trying to exorcise the demons that had arisen in him as a result of these experiences of two people that he was relatively close to dying as a result of drug use. Very, very raw stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it reflected a part of a very long career that involved a lot of different bands and groups of people and producers and people that he played with, involved in a lot of people in an industry that quite frankly has a lot of these types of problems. it would be unlikely that someone who spent so much time with so many different people in this industry wouldn't have had these types of experiences. In this particular case, they just hit him fairly hard, fairly close together during this time period. And then to be hit again, to learn that the lyrics from his song had been used in Kurt Cobain's suicide letter, which he originally said he would never perform that song again. But the family and the previous members of the band had talked to him, and he kind of got him past that. But difficult experiences for someone, and although we've spent the last few minutes talking about some darker topics, and this song was obviously addressing that, it doesn't change the fact that this was the end to a great side of music, which was the end to a great double album, and really a picture into someone who, from the perspective of putting on a great rock and roll concert, was really at their peak at this point in what is the peak of classic rock music in the late 70s. And you've got a lot of things that he'd done before, a lot of things to point to as far as great albums, great songs that had been really entertaining a previous generation, but this hit the mark as far as a live album. And for us who started going to rock concerts at really around this same time in the late 70s, this kind of thing is what a rock and roll concert was all about to us too, which is why we were willing to wait at the Ticketmaster to get our tickets to either head up to the Brown County Arena or down to Milwaukee, or eventually to places like Alpine Valley or wherever we were going to go. And this album was really exactly what we were looking to find when we got there.
And I definitely agree with everything that you just said, and just on the song "Tonight's the Night" itself, before we conclude, the guitar solo at the end, that's kind of the jam, is not really a jam, but just the guitar solo. It is great. I mean, little darker than the songs get progressively darker from 1, 2, and 3,
Yeah.
and at the end it was, but really kind of just good rockin' guitar. I mean, Billy Talbot plays kind of a simple Peter Gunn like bass line, and Neil is just cranking.
Mm-hmm.
It's good. It's just good rock guitar to close out the song, and I agree with you. It's one of the albums that sort of if someone was going to do a documentary about our years in high school, some of the songs off of this album would be part of the background.
They'd be on the soundtrack. So that was Neil Young's and Crazy Horse Live Rust side 4. We'll have a playlist for that you can check out. But I'd really encourage you to listen to the entire thing from start to finish. It is a double album, but it's well worth the time, and does end up fantastically at the end.
And there is a video of the concert, I believe, from the Cow Palace in the San Francisco area that's available. That has it's not all the same recordings that were used on Live Rust, but basically has a video of the entire concert. Well worth the time.
Absolutely. Okay, side
All right.
4, Live Rust from
Great
Neil Young.
Great one, Mark. Talk to you next time.
All right.